accidentally misclick on stopping the stream instead of recording, but well, you didn't see anything, so we'll do as if everything was fine. But anyway, welcome back on the stream for another interview with a member of the European Parliament. Tonight we will be discussing with German MEP Moritz Körner, so from the Renew Europe group, so he's on the center of EU politics. So Moritz Körner is 31 years old. He has been a German MEP since 2019, so it's his first mandate. He's one of the vice chair of the Committee of Inquiry to investigate the use of Pegasus and equivalent surveillance spyware, a very long name, and is also a member of the Committee on the Budget and the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. And within this committee, so he has been the one of the negotiators on the EU budget. He has worked a lot on rule of law, on digital rights. Now he's working on spywares, these kind of things. But we will discuss that in a bit. Before we actually start the interview and the discussion, as usual, a small reminder of the rules of the stream for anyone who would be new with us tonight. Our guest will be with us for about an hour. After that, he will go and enjoy the rest of his evening, while I'll keep streaming for another half an hour to discuss with you what you thought about the interview, my interpretation of things, answer your questions that I could not cover, give a contextual explanation, this kind of thing. As always, I have prepared my own question for Mr. Körner, and I collected questions from people on Reddit and Discord. It's a live interview, so of course you can ask your question via the chat. It's there for that. I will keep an eye on it, and I will pick among your suggestions. So feel free to participate and react, but as always, don't spam and stay civil. So the goal of this interview is for you to know, to meet your MPs, to understand who they are, what they stand for. Also, at the occasion, to ask them your questions, whether on what they do personally, what are their priorities, but also on the state of the European Union in general. So we will try to not go too deep into policy discussion, and we will not go into national politics unless it's very relevant to EU politics. So keep that in mind when asking your question. And on this note, well, let's go into this. Good evening, Moritz Körner. Welcome on the stream, and thank you very much for taking the time to answer a question. So you heard me do the brief introduction with no technical problems whatsoever. Everyone who says that is a lie. So besides what I already said in the introduction, is there anything that you would like to add about yourself before we dive into it? No?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Well, happy to have you there. So, well, actually, let's dive into it, and let's go back a bit in time about you. How and why did you get into politics and then later became an MP? What was the spark for you?
I joined politics very, very early. I was in youth organization of our party of the Young Liberals in Germany. I just went there when I was going to still in school, in high school, and I became interested in politics because politics is everywhere, and all, you know, it influences our world directly, our lives directly. And the liberals, were maybe the closest to what I expected. And then I joined, and I don't know, sometimes I say it's a little bit like drugs, you know, you get addicted to it. You do a little bit more. And then I became a member of the state parliament in my state in North Rhine-Westphalia. And after 2 years, we had the European election, and some colleagues in my party, they came to me and saying, oh, maybe a young candidate would also be very good for Europe. And that's how I got elected to the European Parliament and get involved with politics.
So actually, so once you got elected, you actually started with work quite quickly, because I understand that you were right away the Renew negotiator on the multi-annual financial framework, so the EU budget in short. So you just arrived in the European Parliament and renewed. Well, you probably applied to the job, and you end up in this big negotiation because the EU budget is, I don't want to say the queen of all battle, but it's a very politically important political fight. So how did you like suddenly handle this huge file and all the pressure and all the political stake that were part of it?
Yeah, it was a big start for me. Actually, to add to that, I also was the shadow on the rule of law conditionality, and that was really linked because some of you might remember Poland and Hungary. They threatened to block everything because of the rule of law. So it was a really political decision, and yeah, for me it was a big start. But in the beginning, of course, you think, what are you doing here? But I think it's good to have also new people looking at, and you really feel the pressure and you feel the responsibility. But then you start to work and you work hard and try to bring results. And I think we delivered it. We delivered a pretty good budget. And of course, especially we delivered the rule of law conditionality, and I'm very happy to be part of that and proud to be part of that.
And so you already mentioned that the rule of law conditionality was one of the big topic of negotiation during the budget. But apart from from this, what were the main challenges that you had to face when negotiating the EU budget?
First of all, you have to get into all the numbers because it's a huge budget lines and everything, and you have to understand the system. And it was pretty hard work, but you have lots of people, staff, MEP assistants, but also policy advisors and others who help you. And it's very important that you work as a team together. That you cannot do anything on your own. An MEP is only as good as his team. And I think that was the main challenge, to really start as a team, go into the issues, see the numbers, see the different budget lines and everything. So this was complex work and teamwork. And I think this was the main challenge.
And so now we have a budget, hallelujah. But if you look just at the number, it looks like a huge number, hundreds of billions of euros of budget. But then when you compare that to how rich the EU actually is, it represents barely 1% of the EU GDP. So
Yes.
is it possible to have like a meaningful, ambitious EU action when you have a budget of 1%? And to give a bit of perspective, member states most of the time, in average, they have a budget about 40 to 50% of their GDP. So can you do a lot with 1%?
No, you cannot do anything, or you cannot do everything, because we have this discussion where we always discuss on who's paying and who's getting money from the European Union. I think that was the main thing that frustrates me in budget discussions, because we are not discussing, okay, what political level should it be, the member states level or the European level or maybe communities or something. What political level should do, what jobs or what do we expect from every political level, and then we assign the resources to do that job. We don't have this discussion. We always have a discussion, we don't want to pay more. Lots of national politicians, they say, okay, Europe should do more on Europol. It should have more support for Frontex, it should invest more in digital and everything, but they are not willing to pay for it, and I think that's a big problem. So I'm a liberal, and in German, liberal means that also you are trying to do or try to do as much as possible with the taxpayers' money, but to have not too many taxes. But I think we should be honest when we have a discussion on the budget. We need the resources for new tasks on the European level.
And so so I understand that you're a bit frustrated with the level of the current level of the EU budget, because member states don't want to pay more, but at the same time the EU needs more money to be able to do more. So there is a whole debate about what is called the EU own resources, so the ability for the EU to finance itself. And in the long run, would you see, or would you like to see, for instance, like the EU being able, like, to, in a way, I don't like the word, but to tax citizens, to have like a something that goes directly from the citizens to the EU budget, just like the national budget is financed by the tax of their citizens?
I think we should look into that in the long run, but then we also need other institutional reforms. I'm for a federal Europe. I think we need a stronger European Parliament. We need a European Commission that is really reliant, and then in the end, we would also need these changes. But I also think that we need to choose the right resources, because the big problem is we should use resources that we really can count on. And what we're doing right now is like putting a lot on, for example, the ETS, or on the plastic tax and other things. But if we really achieve what we want to achieve, a greener Europe, then these sources will, be away again in 10, 20, 30 years. I think we should be open for that discussion, but we should discuss it in a more general, holistic way. And we should think about that we should not, we should also have the right institutional framework, stronger parliament in the budget negotiations, for example, to really achieve something.
There's already been like because of COVID and all that, there's been already some innovation when it comes to EU budget, because the EU, for the first time ever, was allowed to go to end up in debt, to borrow money on the market to finance the COVID recovery. So we're not talking about small sums. Back then it was 750 billion euros. So do you think that the EU borrowing money to finance the recovery, A, is a good thing, and two, should it remain like a one-time thing, or should the EU in the future be allowed to borrow money on the regular, just like member states are doing to finance their activities?
I think we also always have to see that if we take in debt, we have to repay it someday. And what I fear a little bit is that next generation EU could mean the next generation pace. And that's not what I want, especially as a young MEP. So I think, of course, the European Union has to be able to react to crises, and we have to think about that. But in general, I think we should try, especially when we see that inflation is going up now, we should not try to put in too much debt on the EU level and on the national level. But of course, in crisis, we have to be able to react, and as a European Union.
So for you, it's more something that is meant for times of crisis. It's not something that should become the habit of the EU. Okay.
Yes.
And still on a final question on this question on the budget. There's been, generally speaking, in the between member states, I don't want to say a fight, but an opposition between, let's say, the south of Europe, so Spain, Italy, France, etc., the Greece, and another group of countries called the frugals, so the Nordic countries, Denmark, the Netherlands, and up to a point Germany as well, until recently, about whether the EU budget should be bigger, whether there should be debt, whether there should be solidarity between member states at the financial level. So where do you stand in this opposition? Do you stand more on the side of the southerners, more on the side of frugals, or do you see a solution in between that could satisfy everyone?
I have a completely different view on it. I think we should not, look at it as frugals and big spenders or something, but we should, actually try to reform the budget. I think the European Parliament is very good in trying to get more for the programs we like, for example, Erasmus and other things. But we should also look into parts of the budget where we may be able to reduce the budget, and we should, when we look at it from a historical perspective, we are getting better and better, because the so-called modern tasks like innovation, Erasmus, green, and everything, they are going up and up and up. and other parts of the budget are going down. But I think we really have to see how do we finance future tasks, and we have to have this discussion I mentioned earlier. What the European level can do can also mean that we have to do less on national level. We don't have to spend more on all levels, but maybe if you have the European Health Agency, for example, maybe that also means that on the national level you can spend less. So I think I would not position myself as a frugal or as a big spender or something. I want to achieve as much as possible with the taxpayers' money as possible on the European level.
And you just mentioned that in some areas maybe the EU budget could be reduced. So is there a particular policy that you think maybe as a budget that could be reduced, or?
I think sometimes when I'm talking to farmers, they are telling me, we need the support from the European Union, but it's also very bureaucratic. Maybe give us a little bit less bureaucracy, and we would also need maybe not as much support as we have right now. So I think we could look into that. I think we have to look into the way we do our cohesion policy. Is it really effective everywhere? And of course, it's also a big question. There we come a little bit on the rule of law conditionality, because we see that lots of money is really wasted in Europe. It's going into dark pockets, and it's going to corruption and misused funds. And I think we should do more to protect our budget, to really make sure that our citizens, the taxpayers that are giving us the money, that it's really spent in the right way.
Actually, I had a question related to the conditionality of rule of law. I was planning to ask later, but since you mentioned it, I will do it now. So now under the current rules, the Commission can decide, with the agreement of the Council, to withhold EU funds to countries that should go to countries where there are problems with the rule of law, to protect the EU budget. This ability, so the rule of law conditionality mechanism, has been criticized, of course, by Poland, of course, by Hungary, because they are the main targets of the mechanism, as being a political weaponization of the EU budget. So how do you react to it? Is it something that is indeed a political tool, or is it something that is just good money management, let's say?
It's not a political tool at all. The regulation is very clear. It's not targeted at any specific country. It's targeted at misuse and corruption, and tax on the rule of law. And if member states stick to the rules, if they have independent judiciary, and if they make sure that the money is spent in the right way, they don't have to fear anything. So it's clearly that, for example, Hungary is not using EU money the right way. Olaf, our agency for countering corruption, says 4% of the EU money that's going to Hungary is spent in the wrong way, is misused, is going to corruption. Everybody who is against the rule of law conditionality is in favor of stealing money, or stealing taxpayers' money. And actually, I really don't get why some right-wing politicians in Europe support actually Hungary or Poland when they are attacking, or they are attacking the rule of law conditionality. Because on the other day, they always tell us that our taxpayers' money is wasted on the European level. So they are really hypocritical here. And I think we should be there very blunt there and clearly. And to be honest, I don't think that the rule of law conditionality will be only focused on Hungary and Poland. It is not that it is stopping all the money. It's like, it can be very focused. It can be on some funds, and if we have problems in other member states, and we know we have also problems in other member states, we can do something about that too. And we also have the European Prosecutor's Office, a new body in the European Union that is also focused on corruption, misuse of EU money. So we have to do more to protect the budget, because in the end, it's about our citizens, our taxpayers, and they can. They ask me, why do you let that happen? Why is it still possible that so much money is misused and it's going into corruption and it's actually helping finance Viktor Orban's system? So I'm really clear on that. And I think there's huge support, even in Poland and Hungary, for our conditionality.
I have a question in the chat. I'm trying to understand it. So why? I will read it like it. So why not enlarge the rule of law mechanism to Ireland, since there is rule of law in Ireland, but it's not enforced, and if it hinders Ireland's competition policies? So I don't know if it's confusing rule of law and the competition policy of Ireland, but do you see beyond the question of Ireland? You said that there are other countries in EU where there could be problems of rule of law. Do you have concrete example in mind?
For example, Bulgaria. The US sanctioned oligarchs from Bulgaria, saying that there's clear signs of corruption. So we have problems there too. We know that we have, that's not a budget question, but we have a rule of law question when it comes to independence or freedom of journalism, when it comes to Malta, for example, where we had a killing of a journalist. So we have different rule of law and fundamental rights questions in different member states. It should not always be about Poland and Hungary, but of course they are the main focus. And when you ask me about Ireland, it's not a problem on the rule of law in Ireland, but to be honest, they of course have very low taxes. That is allowed because we have not a European tax policy, and we have unanimity on tax issues, and that's why we cannot do something about it. But I think that's a problem, and I think especially it's a problem for data protection. We see that actually the Irish Data Protection Authority is not enforcing the rules enough, and I was very blunt and very open. And I criticized the Irish Data Protection Authority for that, because it should, in the common market, it should not be, an argument that actually, we say we have European rules on data protection, but come to Ireland, we will not enforce the rules so strongly. That we cannot let that happen. Mm-hmm. And that's actually something we solved a little bit in the new digital law, the Digital Service Act, where we have a stronger role of the European Commission. If the national authorities are not doing enough, then the European Commission can come in. And especially since in Ireland, all the big companies, Facebook, Google, and so on, they are resided. That's really, really important. And I see maybe the question from the audience that Ireland, of course, is a problem, but I would not say it's a rule of law problem, but it's a problem for enforcing EU rules.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the question of rule of law and the withholding money. So a couple of weeks ago, the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced that she found a solution, between air quotes, with Poland, and so she was unblocking the potential funds for Poland that were until now blocked. It was criticized in the parliament. So do you think that von der Leyen took the right decision, or do you think that she shot the EU in the foot and should have kept the money under lock and key until Poland changed things?
I think her decision is absolutely wrong. And I think that 5 commissioners, 3 of their vice presidents, 2 of the commissioners that are concerned with the rule of law, voted against, is actually showing that she really, she even did not have the support of the whole commission, to say the least. And I think it's a big mistake she made, because she's giving away leverage we have and pressure we have on Poland and protecting the independence of the judiciary, because we are on a slippery slope here. Poland could be the next Hungary if we are not strong enough and I think that lots of the Polish people are expecting the European Union to act, and I think von der Leyen made a big mistake here.
And so, following this decision from von der Leyen, a few MEPs from your own political group, Renew, publicly said, well, the parliament should table a motion of censure, so something that would force the von der Leyen to step down in a commission. And those were not minor MPs, because we are talking about the former chair of ALDE, so Guy Verhofstadt. We're talking about the current vice chair of Renew, Sophie Invert. We think about one of your vice president, Luis Garicano, if I'm not mistaken. But how was the reaction in the group when they proposed, okay, let's shoot down the commission?
Of course, there are always good discussions in the Renew Europe group. I think that's what makes us, that we have a good discussion. Of course, some people say, okay, you cannot shoot down the commission. But I think when we talk about the motion of censure, that's the actual thing, what we're doing. We should be very clear. This European Parliament is always complaining, oh, we're doing resolutions, and the member states and the Commission is not listening to us, and the commissioners are not doing what we want, and they are not coming to us, and they are not really answering. And so you can go to the Parliament and go to any colleague and ask him about the European Commission, and he will complain that we are too weak, and the Commission, and so on and so on and so on. And then we discuss about the Conference of the Future of Europe and how we want to strengthen the European Parliament. But we are not able to, at least, we have a strong weapon here. Some say a nuclear weapon. Of course, you have to think twice how to use a nuclear weapon. But if we are not willing to at least, show it a little bit, then we will never really force the Commission to do something. And I think we proved, I was one of the negotiators who did a resolution. We brought the Commission to court for the failure to act, because we said, you're not enforcing the rule of law conditionality. We are going to European Court of Justice. And that also, put pressure on the European Commission to move. And I think we should do the same here. So I don't want to shoot down the European Commission in a crisis, but I want to make sure that, we say, Ursula, we are watching you, and we can send you home. And that's actually the signal I want to send to.
I have a long and very specific question. It's around Libe, so I think it's in your field. So I'll leave the question: how can you justify as a liberal that you are supporting the council e-evidence proposal with domestic criteria? So practically, this means that you are agreeing with the Hungarian authorities that they can get all content and other electronic data of Hungarian journalists writing critical things about Orban, even if he or she uses a German email address.
I do not support the council position on e-evidence. We are right now negotiating with the council on e-evidence. I'm very much in favor, for example, and I think it's because of me that it's still negotiated for an exemption on the Article 7 countries, because we need. So the e-evidence, maybe to easily explain it, is about working together, providing digital evidence in different member states. And of course, if a company, for example, Facebook, is resided in another member state, if a police or a judicial authority wants to have the e-evidence, they have to go to the other national authority right now. And that's very slow. So we want to make it more European. But of course, with mutual trust, if we trust all the other judicial systems in Europe, it means that if we know that there's a big problem like in Hungary or in Poland, we should be more careful. And that's what I try to negotiate in the text. And we are right now in the negotiations on that point. And also working on protecting, for example, journalists or other important jobs that have certain privileges to be protected, because we want to protect journalists, for example, strongly. we're working on that right now. It's a very difficult file. It's really difficult to find a compromise, and we were negotiating for a long time. But especially when it comes to Article 7 countries, I'm trying to push for a strong and good solution.
So now let's change a bit committee. I mentioned in the introduction, you are the vice chair of the Committee of Inquiry on Spyware, to keep it short, the Pegasus spyware. So there is a debate apparently within the committee on what should be the outcome of that committee. So according to what should this Committee of Inquiry strive to achieve?
Yeah, I think you all know the Pegasus scandal. We know that this software was used by several EU member states, especially again Poland and Hungary. We know that it was used to spy on other politicians, opposition politicians, journalists, activists, and others. And of course, we don't want that in the European Union. So we set up this inquiry committee. We're trying to look into this. We're trying to look into spyware in general, but we also want to see the concrete cases. We also know that we now know that the European Commission was actually targeted with spyware. We know that Commissioner Reinders was targeted with spyware, but we actually don't know what the European Commission actually did about it. It's like a Watergate scandal that a member state obviously targeted the European Commission to spy on them. So we have to look into these scandals, but we also want to see a broader picture on spyware in general. And want to look how it's functioning, what companies are there, what's the problems, could we solve things, for example, with an export ban or something, or ban on spyware like that. That's what we're doing right now, because it's really problematic. And that's connecting even to my work in the Liebe committee as well, because we have to see that we have our phones with us every day, everywhere. And if you are able to spy on my iPhone and you know everything about me, that's really, really sensitive data. And that's why we have to make sure that we have digital rights, that we are not subject to spyware, and that we are not subject to mass surveillance everywhere, like with the chat control that the European Commission is proposing right now. So we really have to fight here, and that's one reason I became part of this committee, and I'm happy to be a vice chair.
And so the Pegasus, so the specific spyware that is the source of the main scandals and the reason of being of this committee of inquiry, was made by an Israeli company called the NSO Group. So there's a question mark on whether the parliament will actually hear people from the NSO Group to ask them, okay, what are you doing about this spyware? So is NSO actually going to come to the parliament to answer about what they're doing, or are they playing hide and seek?
So we have a confirmation that they are coming next week to our inquiry committee. It's good news that they obviously want to explain what they are doing. I am really much looking forward to hear what they are saying, because we don't know a lot of things about the software and how it's used and so on. We will see how open they will be when it comes to questions. To be honest, I'm a little bit frustrated again with the rights of the European Parliament, because I have been in the state parliament in an inquiry committee, and you really have strong, like you can go to the state and ask for data and everything. You have people there under oath. And they would, make themselves subject to an investigation or something if they would lie. So that is all not possible in an inquiry committee in the European Parliament. So we'll see what we, get as information. But I think the inquiry committee can be a platform for information, for exchange, for investigative journalism that is also bringing information. And I'm really looking forward what NSL, the company, will say next week in the committee.
So you mentioned already that some member states in the EU are used Pegasus software. So we know for a fact that Hungary used it, Poland used it. We also know that Spain used it. Other countries, including France, were in discussion to potentially use it. In general, do you think that member states should even be allowed to use such spyware?
Generally, I think we should be very careful using these tools because I think we have to make sure that it's all controlled, and we have to do it in respecting the rule of law. Of course, there can be investigations also in the digital world, but they need to be subject also to a judge that is looking into it and so on. And we should see how intrusive and what actually the software can do. So the problem is we on the European level, we don't have the competence to actually go that much into because it's national competence, the inner security systems and so on. We cannot ban it right away, but if you ask me, I think we should not go into that direction. Europe should be the continent that is protecting civil liberties, and we are looking sometimes we are looking to China as a bad example when it comes to civil liberties, where we see surveillance, mass surveillance, and everything. But then we go back and we tend to forget that actually part of our European values is also digital privacy in general, and especially also digital privacy.
So to sum up for you, it's not about banning the technology altogether. It's about ideally providing a framework so that to make sure that it's not misused.
Yes.
Even if like NSO Group itself is always saying, oh well, we only sell Pegasus for the sake of fighting terrorism, law enforcement. It's not about spying, etc. But in the end, we know that it's being used elsewhere. But we'll see. You actually allowed me to do the perfect transition, because something that we didn't mention in the introduction is that in addition to the committees you belong to, you are part of the EU-China delegation, so the group of MEPs that is supposed to foster good relation, or at least relationship with the parliament of the country. So in your case, between the EU and China. So I think it's safe to say that relations between the EU and China have been frosty over the last couple of years, especially since China has been taking sanctions against fellow MEPs, certain bodies of the EU, etc. So do you think that there could be or should be a normalization of relation between EU and China?
No, I don't think that, because I think it should be, but the first step would be to put away the sanctions on our colleagues. So the problem is that, for example, the head of our delegation, Mr. Bütikofer, is sanctioned. And of course, it makes it difficult to work together. So we did not have the exchanges like it was in the past, and like other delegations have exchanges with or travel to the other countries. That was not possible due to Corona, but also then after the Chinese sanctioned members of the European Parliament. And I think this situation will not get better until we, solve this problem. But I will not I am not in favor of compromising at all when it comes to this question and when it comes to values. And I think the news from the Uyghurs, of what we saw in the last new revelations, that makes it even more difficult to find a common ground. So I asked to be a member of the China delegation because I still think that China is a very, very, very important and interesting power. And that is what interested me most. I think some colleagues, they are choosing the delegations, what the best travel destination would be. I chose China and India as a substitute, because I think these countries, they are so big, they are so important, they will be very important in the 21st century. And that's why you should use the possibility in the parliament to learn and understand these countries. But it's very difficult right now with China.
And still on this EU-China delegation, how does the work to build relationship with a parliament from China work? Because I mean, we can't really say that China is a very democratic country. So how I mean the parliamentary relationship between EU and China, it's not like EU and Canada, so for instance.
Yeah. So in the past, I heard that they had exchanges between the Chinese parliament and our parliament, but as I mentioned, due to Corona, so it was in the beginning. They had also, again, I think, a struggle because they were not happy with Bütikofer and everything. Then there was Corona. Now there's the sanctions, so everything is on ice. So I never worked together with other parliamentarians or something and we did not have exchanges or a delegation travel to China or they traveled to us. I had some exchanges with the Chinese ambassador here in Brussels. That's all we do, and of course that is a diplomatic thing. You talk to them, they say to you what's important for China, and you say discuss about that. But it's not like Canada or the US where they are going to the Congress and meeting people and everything. That's not what's happening right now.
Okay. I had a question from someone about like more the daily life as an MEP. So the question was, how do you handle decisions when you have to vote? How do you take the decision when your personal opinion differs from what the party would suggest? So does your party or your so the party, imagine he speaks about the political group, but also the FDP delegation in the parliament. Do you follow the group? Do you follow the FDP even if you disagree personally, or do you take sometimes say, okay, no, I disagree with it, and I'm not going to vote with the rest of the people?
So I do not follow the group all the time because there's just the group position is not always our FDP position, so sometimes it's pretty difficult. In general, we tend to discuss the things in the delegation as long as possible and try to find a common solution. So normally I vote together with my colleagues, and especially on the issues that are most important for me. I'm working on these issues. So I will, be the expert and will, propose a voting line. On some other issues, of course, sometimes you have issues that it maybe see it slightly different, but also, you're not the expert on these issues, so I tend to trust also my colleagues that they do it right. But I also have positions where I absolutely say, no, I will vote this way when it comes to rule of law. I will vote my line, and until now, my delegation always followed me. But that would be very important for me. So I would, vote my own conscience.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. So Germany, your country, has been quite criticized since the beginning of the war because, from the point of view of the outside, Germany is supportive of Ukraine, but in a very lukewarm, if not reluctant way. So, do you think that is a fair or an unfair assessment of the policy of the German government?
My party was very outspoken when it, for example, came to the issue of weapons. We supported a lot we pushed a lot for delivery of weapons to the Ukraine because we have to do more to support more. And we were not always happy with the decision of the government or the chancellor in whole, but we were there very outspoken also publicly about it. I think on the sanctions, we see that the picture is difficult in different member states. We now saw after the sanction, for example, on oil, we saw that countries are affected by that differently, and that also changes the positions. But in generally, on your question, I think Germany could do more, and I think it's a good sign that finally Olaf Scholz is expected to travel, I think, together with Mario Draghi and Emmanuel Macron to Kiev and to support. And I think we should do more about it.
And do you think so? The difficulty of particularly the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to position himself clearly on Ukraine is Germany or the German government, let's say, paying the price of its past policy of change through trade, so the increase of trade relations with problematic countries like Russia and China, in the hope that they would change, but in the end it was just a dependent relationship with no change, or is it something else?
I think we build up too much dependency on Russia, on Russian gas. I think that was a mistake made by, I don't know, 30 years of German governments. It was already a mistake by Gerhard Schröder, who's now
The lead
still
lobbyist, yeah.
on the paying list of big Russian companies. But to be honest, it's also, it was also the policy of Angela Merkel. Now we see that this is a big problem, and we should also recalibrate our policy towards China. I think we should, have more trading partners. We should not, start to try to, do everything on our own, because I think we, in Europe and especially Germany, is really much relying on experts on trade and everything. But we should, focus on trading partners, maybe that are more closely to our values. For example, Canada, I think we should try to get stronger ties to the US and other liberal countries in the world, Australia, Japan. We should, be trying to trade more with countries we can rely on, and should not focus so much on China, because the German, for example, the German car industry and others, they are really reliant on China. That's becoming more and more a problem.
You just mentioned Angela Merkel. Since she stopped being the German Chancellor last November, she had stayed silent, but last week she finally gave a first interview since then, and she denied any wrongdoing or any responsibility in the current situation. On the contrary, saying that she was never naive. She, on the contrary, basically stopped the war by herself in 2008. So, do you think that she really believes that, or she's just trying to save her legacy as bearing in mind that back then she was seen as the Queen of Europe?
Yes, I think she really believes it, but I think it's just not true. I can follow her a little bit, that she said, I saw that Putin wants to destroy Europe and so on. And I tried to stop, or I tried to, stop this war, or make sure that it's not coming to a war. But then, on the other hand, her energy policy, does not match up to what she said. So she made a mistake. And now that she is not a politician anymore, not an active politician anymore, it would be okay to admit that you are not completely right on everything. And I think nobody can be completely right on everything, and she should be more open about that. But I still think, of course, she has tremendous efforts for Europe and for Germany and everything. But I was critical on policies all the time, on policies she did. But I think she still, she she tried to do her best, and then you can also admit that maybe you failed on some points.
Last question on Ukraine, and then we move on. Someone was asking whether the criticism that has arisen against Germany since the beginning of the war would affect, in your view, the role of leader of EU integration that Germany had until now. Do you think that Olaf Scholz shot the German leadership in the foot, or do you think it's still going to be the same regardless of Ukraine?
I think Olaf Scholz has to become, it's difficult after 16 years of Merkel to, it was clear that he will not, be Angela Merkel from, day one. So he has to define his role. I already said I would see a more active role for him also in this conflict right now. But I think, it's too early to say how Germany or the new government will position itself on other issues. I know that, for example, on going for treaty change, for example, what the French presidency is proposing now after the conference of the future of Europe, Germany is very much in support. And on other issues. So we could be more active and more in a leadership role, but I think it's too early to say we shut down everything. It's the same, like, Poland is doing a lot to support Ukraine, and it's doing a lot to, especially the Polish people, to support refugees, and I admire that. But that does not mean that it changed the position on the rule of law and the independence of judiciary. I think you have to separate also some issues sometimes, because otherwise, we will not make good decisions for Europe in the future.
And actual, real last question on Ukraine: do you support the candidacy of Ukraine to join the EU?
Yes, the candidacy. I support the candidacy, but I think we should make no rebates or anything on the criteria. I want to have the Copenhagen criteria fully in place, because we would make, talked a lot about the rule of law. We need to make sure that rules, that we are applying all the rules in the European Union. So I think we need a strong signal and a sign of support. And I think the candidacy status is important, but within the process we have lots of candidates, but we should not make any compromises when it comes to our criteria for accession.
You mentioned it already. Germany is very dependent on Russian gas, and in general, the German economy is very natural gas intensive. And today, the committees, the Envy Committee and the Econ Committee of the Parliament, voted against the so-called taxonomy, so the green label on what is considered a green investment or not. And the Commission proposal was proposing that investment in nuclear and in natural gas under certain conditions should be considered green. So, do you agree with the fact that the proposal of the Commission was wrong to include nuclear and natural gas?
I think so. I think the whole process or the whole taxonomy is a problem, because the idea in the beginning was we want to have this green label for investment, because we want to make sure that not some sketchy banker is like putting, saying this fund is green and people are investing in it, and actually it's not really green. So we wanted to have a label on that. That was the idea of the taxonomy. But the problem was that we now put the taxonomy everywhere in different files and everything. So in the end, if you want to get finance something, you need to have it in the taxonomy. And that lead actually to the situation we have right now, that we need gas infrastructure and also nuclear in it to finance investments into it. And of course, we know for the French, but also for other member states, nuclear was very important. The Germans, Germany did a different decision. We want to go out of nuclear. But I accept also other member states that have other decisions. For us, of course, gas is important. So it's really difficult to make the decision, but I think the general approach is wrong. And I know that our government may be against the decision right now. In the end, I think I will abstain.
Okay, interesting. And I have a question from the chat for clarification on Ukraine. So the question is, would you accept the candidacy of Ukraine at the end of the current conflict or while it's ongoing?
I would accept it if the criterion are fulfilled. And to be honest, that will need years, many years, because we need to. They have to change the judicial system. They have to apply lots of laws and everything. So the way from candidacy, granting candidate status to really being a member it takes time. We don't know how long the war takes, so I cannot really answer to that. But I think it's important that we send a clear signal, but that we don't, on the other hand, really make sure that the criterion are fulfilled, and that we don't compromise on, for example, the rule of law and anti-corruption measures and everything, and then we have a problem later. So I want to have the Ukraine in the European Union, but we need to stick to our rules and values.
And if you could change anything, you can snap your finger, you change anything about the EU politics or whatever, what would you change and why?
If I snap my finger, that's an interesting thing. I would create a real European public debate, TV talk shows everywhere about European politics, much more European debates, because I think that is the main thing that is lacking. We are talking to our national audience. Some discussions are not really, discussed in all over Europe, but very national discussions and everything. And that is the main problem. Everything else would fall in line, because if you were at a real European debate, you would get real European superstars, politicians and everything. They would have the power. But right now it's the leaders and everything, and that is a big problem. So I think we need, and that is what I would do, is like a real public European debate, and the formats and the TV shows and everything coming with that.
Traditionally, as a final question, I ask whether the guest is for or against a federal Europe. You already said that you are in favor of federal Europe, so I'm going to transform my question. Why are you in favor of federal Europe? Well, why do you think it's needed, and at what point in time?
I think as soon as possible. And for me, federal Europe means that Europe does not have to do everything, because I think we can leave a lot of things to the member states. But we should be clear on what issues we really want to solve together, like digital, like climate, like foreign policy, security policy, all these issues that no member state can solve alone. And then we need the resources and or the decision making on the European level. That would be like a strong parliament, like a European Commission that is dependent on the parliament, a real European government that is voted by the members of the European Parliament. That would be a federal Europe for me, and I would need it as soon as possible, because we need to be able to counter the challenges, or the challenges of the 21st century, and we will not do it without a federal Europe, I think.
So we reached the end of the hour together. Before I thank you and that you go enjoy the rest of your evening. If people had to remember one thing from an interview, what should they remember about you?
I think that they should remember that young politicians are fighting for a strong federal Europe and values, and that you always can contact me. If you have other questions, I'm on lots of social media platforms, so feel free to contact me. And yeah, that would be very good if it would be possible to get to know me a little bit, get to know my issues, and contact me if you have any questions.
Well, that's perfect. You can see below Mr. Körner's video feed is Twitter at, so you can contact him through there, or of course you can send you an email on his good old MEP email address. But Moritz Körner, thank you very much for taking the time to answer my questions tonight. Chat, make sure to thank him as well. Stay with me, we're gonna do the debriefing. So Mr. Körner, thanks again, and hope you enjoyed it, and well, I wish you a good evening.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. All right, let's do the debriefing. Let me remove Zoom and meeting. All right. So, what did you think? What did we think about the interview? In the meantime, I'm taking my notes. So yeah, quite a lot of things we discussed, and topics that we don't usually discuss. I mean, rule of law. We talk about rule of law all the time, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. We've talked ad nauseam about the rule of law between the interviews, the news review, and all that. But you only join at the end? Oh well, that's too bad. Well, you can still watch the replay if needed. You had a bad call. Oh well, sorry to hear about that. Hope you will recover and feel better soon. Still wrong 1.5 page. Still wrote 1.5. Yes, that's right. You it's true that I forgot that you take notes every time. So yeah, what did we talk about? We talked a lot about the budget. I'm not a budget expert, so I will trust what he said. We talked about the size of the EU budget. So I mentioned it during my question. The EU budget is actually quite small when you look at the overall EU economy. It's only the EU budget only represents about 1% of the EU GDP. So all the value, the richness that the economic value of the EU, the budget is only 1% of that, and worse than that, it's 1%, and it can't go above. Actually, the member states had put in the law that the EU cannot have more than 1.1 something percent of the GDP. And so he was saying that it was frustrating because that means that you don't have enough money to do what you want. And so he wanted to reform the budget, generally speaking, to ensure that there is more funds through different sources. So we talked at some point about maybe in the long term the idea of an EU tax, so that the fact that you would pay just like citizens pay taxes to your government, to your member state, you will also pay taxes that will go to the EU budget, so that then the EU can finance whatever it needs to finance, and that goes back to you. Also, I thought it was interesting that for him it's not a matter of always increasing the budget, always in everything, and more and more. He said, yeah, we have to look at things. If we increase the budget, the EU budget, in something, maybe we can reduce the national budget on the same thing, because the EU is actually doing the same work. So he mentioned, for instance, on health policy, if we do an ambitious EU health policy, then maybe member states would have to invest to have maybe slightly lower budget on for healthcare, these kind of things. He said also that there could be way to look into how the agricultural funds, the cohesion fund is the investment in the region. So it's meant as a way to ensure that the poorer regions of Europe catch up with the richest ones. So it's a way to balance, to avoid that there is too much discrepancy between like a German lender and a Bulgarian region, to take the extremes. And so he says, yeah, maybe there is ways to save a bit of money by strengthening things here and there. So the liberal perspective of not having the biggest budget. Yes and no. It's the tip. I agree. It's a liberal perspective on the idea that you need to optimize the budget and all that. But at the same time, he says the EU needs a bigger budget. You can't go around this. So he's not following the member state to say, oh well, no, you will not take more money from me and from my citizens. Do your little policy with your little budget. So on this note, he's not completely he's not the same line as a Mark Rutte, for instance, the Prime Minister of Netherlands, who is a liberal as well. Another thing that we discussed was the ability for the EU to contract debt. So normally, until recently, the EU was actually forbidden from having debt. That's why it was only functioning with the contribution of the member states, because it was forbidden from borrowing money on the market, just like a member state can do. Your member state can borrow money on the markets to finance itself, and so it generates debt. And so normally the EU was forbidden to do that. But a couple of years ago, 2020, so yeah, a couple of years ago now, for the first time, the EU decided was authorized to have debt to finance the COVID recovery, so to try to fix the economic damage that were caused by the pandemic. And so the EU was allowed to borrow on the markets 750 billion euros worth of debt. And so they created a debate, one of the many debates on EU economy, on whether in the future the EU should again be allowed to borrow money, because these 750 billion euro that the EU not free borrow, but is allowed to get in debt, was decided as a one-time thing. Like, it was one of the conditions that for Germany, for the Nordic countries, for the so-called frugals, they said, okay, we will allow it now because it's important, it's a crisis, we face COVID, but we will never do it again in the future. And he seemed to agree with this view, saying, yeah, I don't think that indebting ourselves is a sound policy, because the debt that we take now is us and our kids will have to reimburse it, so that's not a good budget management. So it was more on the line of let's say typical German and also frugals to an extent, saying, okay, it's a one-time thing or a crisis thing. It should not become the normal way for the EU to manage its budget. Oh shit, I'm dropping my pen. We talked a lot about the rule of law. So the rule of law, I will go quite quickly because we discussed that many times. So the fact that the EU now is allowed to withhold funds, so EU funds, against countries that do not respect the rule of law, so that they, for many reasons, like for instance, you have the case where the justice system is not independent. So if you invest EU money in there, that means that there can be misuse of EU money, and you have no recourse before the judge because the judge is not independent. You have corruption, this kind of thing. So due for these concerns, there is a possibility now for the EU, the Commission, to not give the money to the member state, which caused quite a big fight with Poland and Hungary, of course, which went up to the European Court of Justice that said that the Commission was right, which was very much expected. Now we also have a big criticism against the president of the Commission, so Ursula von der Leyen, because she took a couple of weeks ago the decision to allow to unblock, potentially unblock funds for for Poland, in exchange for promises on changes on its judicial systems. And many people in the parliament and beyond were criticizing von der Leyen, and Moritz Körner here was also very critical of her, saying that it was a mistake because basically the EU was giving up the only leverage that it had against Poland to force it to change, to get back into respecting the rule of law, because to give you perspective, Poland is the biggest beneficiary of the EU funds. About 3% of its GDP is only EU funds, so that's a shit ton of money. And so VDL von der Leyen said, okay, maybe we will unlock the money to Poland, which we were blocking until now. So big outrage in this. Some MEP even called for a motion of censure. So the motion of censure, what is it? It's the tool. It's basically the atomic bomb, the nuclear button that the parliament has against the commission. So if the parliament proposes and adopts a motion of censure, it means that the commission has the obligation to resign. So because the European Commission is responsible in front of the parliament. And so if the motion of censure was proposed and adopted, and it's a wide majority, it's a 2/3 majority of the parliament to adopt a motion of censure, so it would be very, very, it's quite difficult to do, then von der Leyen would be obliged to resign, all the commission would resign, and so you would have to find a new president of the commission and all that. And so some MEPs proposed to do that. They were shut down by most political groups, if not all political groups, because they said, no, we can't fire von der Leyen right in the middle of the war in Ukraine. That's not possible. But we can say, okay, under certain conditions, maybe we will do it. But he was still, Moritz Körner was a bit sad, let's say, that the parliament is afraid of its own power. That he said, okay, we have the one tool to put pressure on von der Leyen, on the commission, by saying, okay, if you don't do what we want, we will shoot you down. And we are too afraid of our own power. We never use it. We never threaten to use it. So nobody take us seriously. That was more or less his regret. We talked about the Pegasus spyware. So Pegasus is a spyware developed by the Israeli company NSO Group, which allows to spy on people. It's called a spyware, and there's been a scandal because it emerged that this software that is supposed to be used against terrorists, criminals, and all that has also been used by governments against their opposition, against journalists, this kind of thing, and even against foreign head of state. So, for instance, we know that he mentioned it. A number of commissioners in the European Commission were targeted by Pegasus. We know that we suspect that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, was targeted by Pegasus. We know that the Spanish government was targeted by Pegasus. This kind of thing. So he created a whole mess on spyware and the origin of this committee of inquiry, which will not at the end decide okay, we will ban the spyware. That's not in its power. It's literally just to collect information to understand better one problem and then make a recommendation, but it doesn't have legal power per se. We talked about China. So yeah, China has inflicted sanctions against some member of the European Parliament, also some committees of the European Parliament, some bodies of the Council, which is something that had never happened before. So since China has done that, relationship between the EU and China are very bad. There was this investment agreement between China and the EU, and the second, which was already very controversial, and the second China imposed the sanctions on MEPs. The parliament said, well, you want to play like that? Well, we're not going to vote your investment agreement. It's going to stay in the fridge until you remove the sanctions on our MEPs and on the EU, which is unlikely to happen anytime soon. Hello, Wikidex. What else do we have? We talked a bit about voting. How does it work for MEPs? How do they vote when they don't agree with what their political group thinks? So are they obliged to follow whatever their political group thinks? So the answer is no. MEPs there is no strong voting discipline in the European Parliament, meaning that political groups cannot impose to its MEP to vote in a certain way. So in this case, Körner belongs to Renew Europe. Renew Europe, when it's voting on legislation on any file, it will prepare, of course, a voting recommendation based on the following debates within the group and all that. So it say, okay, we recommend that the group vote like this, but MEPs are not obliged to follow. If they disagree, they can vote differently. With certain exceptions, because on some very important votes, you have what you call a whip, where there can be sanctions, like for instance, but only for the very, very, very politically important vote. Like for instance, for the designation of the president of the commission, for the EU budget, for these things, yes, there can be a whip, so the de facto voting discipline, and if the MEP does not follow the voting group, the group, then there can be sanctions, or at least he will have to explain himself or herself to the group. So it's quite rare. Bottom line is MEPs decide by themselves, and there are many reasons why whip like in the House of Cards. Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. The whip in the US, the whip is a job, a position that is given to one MP, one congressman, who is supposed to make sure that his group, his members vote in a certain way, and so he will bully people so that they vote just like the rest of the group. In the parliament, there is not exactly a role like that. You can have in groups whips, but they don't have the same level of power, the same level of political power to force MEPs of their group to vote like that as the group. It's only for the biggest, the most important votes where the group says, okay, here is too important to mess around. Either you're with us or you're against us. And so why are MEPs allowed to vote differently from their group? Because you can have many different reasons why you don't follow your group. Because European political groups, so let's take Renew Europe, you have in Renew Europe MEPs from France, Germany, Romania, Italy, etc., etc., and each of these countries have different political position. Like the Moritz Körner comes from the FDP, so the FDP. The French comes from LRM, so Ensemble, En Marche, pardon. But they're not they don't think the same thing. Like politically speaking, the FDP, the French FDP, and the German FDP and the French En Marche, they don't exactly have the same political position. They are compatible. That's why they belong to the same group, but they're not exactly the same because politics vary from member state to member state, and so sometimes there is you can have a decision that there can be a recommendation from Renew on the text, and the FDP will say, well, I'm sorry, but on this, it's not compatible with what us Germans think on this matter, so we're going to vote differently. So you notify this to the group, and you vote differently, and that's it. Or even individually, an MEP can say, okay, personally, I don't agree with what the group is doing, so I will vote differently. It's allowed. Was there any recent example of a vote where whips were needed or used? I don't know example where whips were used. I know the typical example where whips are needed, or at least they are used, is for, like I said, for the big votes. When in 2019 the parliament was voting on whether Ursula von der Leyen was going to become president of the European Commission, when there is a vote of confidence on a commission, these kind of things, you will have a whip, because as a political group, the political position was, okay, we're going to support Ursula von der Leyen, and that's it. If you don't agree with it, then you don't belong in this group, basically. But it's rare. It's not something that happens very, very often, because de facto, yeah, it's quite often that you have different views. Huh? If you go on many files that are being voted, you will see that not all MPs in the same political group vote the same way for many different reasons. because they have different considerations, because of different national consideration, etc. Yeah, there's many reasons why you would not necessarily vote the same way. What else did we talk about? We talked about Ukraine then for a bit. So the chain through trade policy that Germany had for a long time. So chain through trade, it's the name of the German policy where it was considered that to encourage democratic change in authoritarian countries, so think about Russia and China, for instance, it was encouraged to have deeper trade link with these countries, because then these economic links would allow for would create a dependence between the country and the democratic country and the non-democratic country. It would facilitate the emergence of a middle class in the country concerned, in the authoritarian country, so that it becomes more difficult for the country to go without the democratic country, etc., etc. In practice, it didn't work. We have seen that despite Germany becoming very dependent from Russia when it comes to energy, to dependent economically from China when it comes to car industry, there was no positive evolution of these countries following these intense trade relationship. On the contrary, Germany was weaker because it was not allowed to speak as loud as it could or as it wished to speak when it came to issue. Would be nice if you would add a party affiliation of the guest into the title. That's it's not a title. That's a good point. Usually I try to put at least the European political group. So okay, I forgot this time. So but yeah, next time I will re-indicate, make sure to indicate the political groups. Sorry about that. But in any case, I mean, I mentioned it in the introduction and all that. So yeah, for tonight, Moritz Körner is a German MEP from Renew Europe, so the centrist, the liberal centrist. He comes from the German, the National Party. National Party would be nice as well. Yeah, National Party, I don't put it in the title because it doesn't mean much for most people. Like FDP, it doesn't mean much for most French people. Would not know what FDP is. Most Italian people would not know what the FDP is. I can mention it in the course of the introduction if it makes sense, but otherwise, I mean, I take the European view. So they belong to Renew Europe, and that's what matters. That's their European political groups. And then, like you mentioned, there can be differences between internal parties, but that's a question I can ask as part of the question I ask to MEPs. German liberals are more center-right, but in Denmark, for instance, they are left liberal. Yeah, you are right. You are right, but I mean, it's for the sake of simplicity. It's for the sake of simplicity, and also to be honest, also because I'm not an expert on every single national politics. So I mean, for instance, I didn't know that the liberals in Denmark are considered left liberals. That I didn't know, for instance. So I will not be able to make a useful comment in there. But at the very least, yes, I should indicate the European political group. And then if in the conversation we talk about the relationship between the national party and the rest of the European party, that's a logic question that we can discuss. Another point, going back to the conversation, another point I want to talk about Ukraine, when we talked about the candidacy of Ukraine. In June, member state, the country, the EU member state are supposed to decide whether to grant or not to Ukraine the status of candidate to join the EU. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that Ukraine will join the EU right now. It just means that negotiations can start on joining the EU. And like Moritz Körner said, it takes a long time to discuss. I mean, at the very least, in the best conditions, it takes at the minimum 5 years for a country to become an actual member of the European Union. And like Körner said, he said, yeah, I'm in favor of Ukraine being candidate to the EU, but I don't want the EU to give up on its criteria to join the EU. It doesn't want to give a favorable or a shortcut to join the EU. So what are the criteria? He talked about the Copenhagen criteria. So the Copenhagen criteria are it's the name given to the conditions for a country to join the European Union. And so it's a combination of political, economic, legal, and geographic conditions. So, for instance, one thing that you need to make sure is that the country that wants to join the EU has already catch up on most of the existing EU laws. Why? Because you want, the second that the country joins the EU, you want that the EU laws apply directly to it. So it has to have already included in its national law the EU laws. You have economic conditions, like to make sure that your economy is strong enough to sustain the internal competition of the single market, so that it doesn't collapse when you will have companies and products from all around Europe coming to your country. You have strong conditions when it comes to the rule of law to make sure that your country is actually democratic, that there is an independent judiciary, that there is no corruption, this kind of thing. All kind of things on which Ukraine will have a lot of work to do, because regardless of the war, Ukraine is well known for being very corrupted. There's a lot of corruption in Ukraine. The institutions are not very solid, this kind of thing. So there is a lot of work to be done already politically in the institutions to fit the conditions to join the EU. And then if you add on top of that the war, it would not be. For starter, to go back to the question you had, real talk. Ukraine would not be able to join the EU if the war was still going on, or while the war was going on. Why? Because for starters, if the war is going on, then basically the national economy is completely shot to shit. There is no infrastructure. The country is complete ruins. Etc. So the state is nowhere ready to be on par or with the rest of the union, economically speaking. Then on the political level and geopolitical level, you will never have a country join the EU right in the middle of a war, because that would mean that the EU would then de facto almost be at war with Russia. So no country in Europe wants to be at war with Russia. So as long as the war continues, Ukraine is not going to join the EU. It's because, like, what happened in Cyprus. Cyprus is it's a good counterexample, but the way they deal with Cyprus. So Cyprus is a divided island. The island of Cyprus, you have on the one part what we call Cyprus, and then you have the Turkish occupied Cyprus, which is more or less half the country. When Cyprus had joined the EU, there was the conflict was frozen. There is no war. There's no active war in Cyprus. You don't have the Turkish army fighting against the Cypriot army. So the conflict is frozen. You have already UN resolutions that are, so the UN took a resolution saying, okay, the conflict, the island should be united, so under Cyprus control. And so the EU is saying, okay, under these conditions, we consider it possible for Cyprus to join the EU, and they don't recognize the Cyprus, the Turkish occupied territory of Cyprus. They consider that Cyprus as a whole is Cyprus. For them, Turkey is not occupying illegally the northern part of Cyprus. And they're saying, okay, there are negotiations, and we want the negotiation to succeed so that there is again a unification of Cyprus. But in the eye of Europe, Cyprus is already a single country, and it supports the unification, etc., etc. And there is no active conflict. So that's two big differences with Ukraine and Russia in this case. But yeah, bottom line is Ukraine, even if tomorrow it gets the status of candidate countries, it will take 10-15 years of negotiations before it is even able to join the EU. So we're nowhere near the completion of the process. And bear in mind that there are other countries already in the waiting list. You have the Kosovo, you have Serbia, you have Montenegro, Turkey, who are already in the waiting line to join the EU. These countries have been in the waiting line for 20 years plus. Some of them it's a bit hypocritical. Like for instance, Turkey. Everybody knows that Turkey will never join the EU, but nobody wants to take the political responsibility of killing the negotiations. But well, still, as for the Balkan, everyone agrees that they should enter the EU at some point, but they have been negotiating with the EU to join for 10-15 years already. And there's no reason why it should be different for Ukraine. And apart from that, what can I tell you about? I thought it was interesting his answer about what he would change about the EU. Usually people say, "Oh, I want to give the parliament the right of initiative. I want to remove the vetoes, this kind of thing." And he said, "Yeah, no, actually, the thing I want is I want to create a real EU public space so that there is actual EU political debate that citizens are interested and are following. Because from there, if you have a real EU level public space, then that means that you will have real EU politicians, and there will be citizen pressure, and things will evolve positively from there." So I thought that was an interesting perspective on things, because it's true that today people look at things from purely the national perspective. It's only national politics, and you don't really have EU-wide debates. There was an attempt with the Conference on the Future of Europe, which I would say was a failure to that extent. But well, Serbia has been negotiating in quite interesting ways. Yes, Serbia is being pretty criticized lately for its acquaintance with Russia, to say the least. And it's been told recently that if it wants to join the EU, it should get its ducks into row. But anyway, that's what I had for you tonight. If you have any comments or questions, now is the time. Otherwise, I'm going to do my little conclusion. In the meantime, I'm going to scroll up to see if I missed anything. I don't see any burning questions, so I will start then my conclusion. Let's go back there. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming over. It was an interesting interview. The next stream is going to be on Sunday for the news review at 6 in French and at 8 in English. As always, if you like what you saw, follow the channel. If you feel mighty generous, you can even subscribe or toss a coin to your streamer via Coffee. You can follow me on my other social media, Twitter, Discord, YouTube, all the good things. You just have to click. But yeah, on this note, yeah, I wish you a good evening, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone. Ciao.